Book 8, The Last Day, Chapter 7, The 36th Day of Planting, Part 2 of 4. "What now, Pugga?" young Pere whispered, glancing over his shoulder at the mountain behind him. Already Hammer and Iron had made it up the slope and were at the rock face, helping Mr. Rescatar out of the net. Reg and Nelt were both with Mrs. Rescatar, pointing up at the rock face and trying to figure out the best routes for the injured to take. Pal and Buddy were closing in, jogging up the slope with Silvo and Vito, with Phoebe behind. Teach was next, with Luis, and Snarl was loping ahead of them all, racing to the rock face. Bringing up the rear was Versa, jogging clumsily with the baby, while Beavid pulled her along up the hill as quickly as she could move. Satisfied they were all safely away, each with soldiers to assist them, young Pere turned back at the river. "You wait. Conserve your strength. One will reach you first. You'll need to disarm him. Take a sword, then I will help you do the rest." Young Pere watched anxiously as the two soldiers slowly forded the river. One was nearing the bank, but lost his footing. "He's tiring, isn't he?" "Yes. The longer he's in the cold water, the weaker he'll be when he reaches you. Take advantage of that. Just get his sword." "I'm a little weak myself, Pugga." Young Pere looked behind him again. "I haven't slept well in days. Just a little wet and cold here." He saw Versa nearing the rock face, the baby clutched in her arms. Beavid was now dragging little Silvo, cold and terrified. "Go!" young Pere whispered in Versa's direction. "Go!" She glanced back as if she heard him from several hundred paces away. He gestured urgently for her to keep moving, and she nodded. To his surprise, she started to ably climb the rock face while clutching her baby, catching up to Mrs. Rescatar, who was gaining on her husband. But poor Mr. Rescatar, hopelessly weak and slow, had Hammer and Iron on either side of him, hefting him gingerly over the rocks he couldn't manage. An angry shout from the river spun young Pere back around. The first soldier was crawling onto the bank, exhausted but furious as he swore in frustration. "Don't let him rest. Get the sword now." Without a word, young Pere charged at the soldier. The man struggled to get to his feet, but young Pere kicked him in the face. The soldier fell backward, dropping his sword on the bank, and splashed into the river, unconscious, while young Pere snatched up the sword and stood on the bank. The current swiftly carried the soldier away. "Well done, young Pere. Now get ready for the rest." "The rest? I see only one more." "No, young Pere. You've been tracked. Look to the forest." "Oh, Pugga, no!" Versa ignored the cramping in her gut as she continued up the rock face. She kept her baby securely in her left arm and leaned forward to pull up with her right. Murmuring in frustration that she didn't have time to wrap the baby to her body, she'd already passed Mrs. Rescatar and her helpers, who encouraged her to keep going, and was now gaining on Phoebe and Vito, who were making quick progress, scrambling up the rock. "When you get to the top," she called to Phoebe, "run to the site and get Guide Zenas. Your father's going to need more help." "I'll get there," called Snarl. He left the side of Mrs. Rescatar and scaled the rock as if he were a spider. "What about you?" Phoebe called down to Versa. Versa considered how convenient it was that the intense cramping kept her bending forward. I'm fine, she lied. "But we need to hurry." Mrs. Rescatar screaming below her caused Versa to look to the river. She saw the clash of blades before she heard it. "No, young Pere," she whimpered. Beyond the river in the forest, she spied the rest. "Oh, come on, that's not fair." Soldiers, at least 24, were pouring out of the trees. Most hesitated as they saw the swift water. "Keep climbing, Versa. There's nothing you can do to help him. Don't make him worry about you. Turn around." But Versa was transfixed, staring at horror mixed with pride, as an attacking soldier collapsed in front of young Pere in his own pool of blood. "He got one! Young Pere did it!" Another soldier was struggling out of the freezing water and lumbering at young Pere. Another swipe, and he, too, fell back into the river. See, he's all right. Keep going, Versa. Get yourself and the baby to safety. You don't have much time. Climb. Beavid! Nelt shouted down to the staff sergeant. He was prodding little Silvo up to Nelt, who was balancing a few paces higher on the rock. We have to help Shin. Beavid twisted and gaped as another bleeding soldier fell into the water. Well, he's got a sword, Beavid said uncertainly, and glanced back up the rock where Versa and the Rescatar family were making progress, but not fast enough. We've got to stay and help the family, Nelt, Shin ordered. I'm ordering, Nelt bellowed, and I'm a real lieutenant. He was just given the title. I say we get back down there and help him. Beavid twisted back and forth, unsure of what to do, people on either side of him needing assistance. These people are helpless, Nelt told the sergeant. We have to be the next line of defense. And that's what we do, Beavid declared, suddenly struck with an idea. We hang back in case any soldiers get past Shin and make it up this rock face. We'll fight them off from here. Nelt bobbed his head. All right. We can help the Rescatars climb, but we stay at the end as the next line. Wish I had a blade, though, he said longingly, as he noticed another abandoned sword near Shin. Boys, came a weak voice above them on the slope. It was Mr. Rescatar. You're surrounded by weapons. And Iron released his arm so that he could gesture around them. The rocks? Nelt asked, unconvinced. But Beavid was already loosening a kickball-sized stone. I could heave this a decent distance. Come on, Nelt. You should be able to improvise. You were training to be an assassin, after all. Mr. Rescatar, who'd been struggling over a rock with Hammer's and Iron's help, tried to turn around again when he heard the word. You're an assassin? He cried down feebly. His son Silvo had now reached Nelt and was gripping his hand, looking for comfort. Hearing the alarm in his father's voice, Silvo looked up at Nelt with wide eyes. What's that mean? Nelt sighed and squeezed his hand. It means I now work for you and your family. Start climbing up to your father. Nelt nodded reassuringly to Mr. Rescatar, but the father's eyes were still big with worry. Nelt and Beavid made their way up a few more paces, where a natural cache of smaller stones sat, as if ready for that moment, and they started adding to the pile. Young Pere stared in surprise as another man fell into the river, bleeding profusely. How did I? You didn't do it all by yourself, young Pere. He knew that was true. Someone as unskilled with a sword as he was shouldn't have been able to take out each man so swiftly and even elegantly. One strike, maybe two, and so far each of his attackers had fallen into the river or on the muddy banks. It was Pugga, all of it. He took what little skill young Pere had and magnified it by 50. Young Pere made the mistake of glancing across the river. Pugga, there are too many. Steady, young Pere. This is why you're here. I will guide your arm again. Give the others a chance to escape. You don't need to hold them off for too long. Just worry about the next few men. He steadied the sword as the next man tried to climb out of the river. That's when a thought came to his mind, a certain conclusion. Pugga, is this the last day for me? Does it matter if it is, young Pere? Feeling suddenly hot and heavy, young Pere decided, No, it doesn't matter. I didn't get to see Papa or confess to him what I've done, but I'm going in the right direction, finally. I just took too long to get here. It's my fault, I know. But she's on the mountain. She'll be safe soon. So will the baby. Pugga, his voice quavered. Just make sure she meets Cephas, all right? One of the soldiers from the river was righting himself, looking unnaturally large as he dripped river water like a swampy creature. Make sure he knows how amazing she is? Tears stung young Pere's eyes. Just make sure she's happy somehow. She'll be happy, young Pere. Stay with me, please. All right, Pugga? The soldier began to stomp toward him. That's why I'm here, young Pere, until the very end. You and me together. Brace yourself. Back door, Shem shouted as he, Pere, Cephas, and now several more men up for the morning joined them in a race to the middle route that no one had attempted to take. Shem broke into a full run, darting around cold fires and rushing past sleeping bodies and tents. Pere struggled to keep up with him. Shem, why are we in such a hurry? Not sure, Pere, Shem panted, but we need to get there now. Versa was nearing the top. It was only about 20 more paces, but the rock seemed sharper, steeper, and more impossible to climb. Phoebe and Vito were almost there as well. Versa could barely move for pain, but she wasn't about to quit. Not this close. It wasn't about her. It was about her daughter. Although Versa was barely crawling, they would make it, she was sure. She glanced down again as she heard more swords clanging, and she gasped as she saw young Pere battling 2 men. He went down, the lower half of his undershirt turning red. No, she whimpered. Dear Creator, you can't take him. Please, let me keep him. Young Pere struggled back to his feet, and one of the soldiers went down, then the other. A third was coming for him. Versa, go. You're almost there. Get him help. She turned, ignoring her cramping, and tried to go over the next rock, but she was growing weaker. Clutching her infant, who was feeling heavier every moment, she looked up and sighed in relief. Snarl had reached the top and was looking down at her. True to form, he snarled and pulled a long knife from his boot. Young Pere struggled to get upright. He thought he should be feeling more pain for having been hit in the face like that, but instead he only felt confused. There was blood on his undershirt, but he wasn't sure where it came from. Maybe from the dead soldier lying at his feet? Yet maybe he was hit harder than he realized, because he was inexplicably flagging. But he couldn't stop. There were soldiers and water and blades and, bizarrely, a few stray rocks flying from behind him, occasionally hitting the soldiers with only distracting force. You call that a decent throw? Nelt cried as Beavid threw a rock that didn't even roll all the way to the attacking soldiers. It was a big rock and heavy, Beavid said, as Nelt hurled another small stone at a soldier. By the time it reached him, it merely bounced off his shoulder, doing nothing more than dirtying his wet uniform. Just keep chucking rocks, Nelt insisted. Draw away their attention from Shin. Maybe one of them will come up here where we can hit him with something bigger. Why the slagging creek did I throw away my crossbow? Young Pere shook his head to try to clear it, but that only resulted in him growing dizzy. Maybe if he were more balanced, went the stray thought through his head. He stooped to pick up a fallen soldier's sword in his other hand. While he now had an equal weight in each clenched fist, the color in the world was now unbalanced, everything turning shades of gray. Oh, I know what this means, he garbled, trying to focus on the next soldier hulking up to him, strangely, but fortunately, in slow motion. Pugga, I'm going down. Are they safe yet? Not quite. Hang on, young Pere. He gripped the hilts tighter until he realized that wasn't what Pugga meant by hanging on. He was referring to something bigger, deeper. But what that was, young Pere couldn't fathom because his stomach began to heave, and too many experiences told him he had only moments left of consciousness. You have to do it, Pugga. Can you do it? Help me until they're safe? Of course. Snarl, standing at the top of the rock face, leered down at Versa, who had frozen in terror on the rocks. You're his daughter, aren't you? I heard Shin call you Ursula Thorn last night. Did you know there's a reward for you? I imagine it will be doubled if I bring in the baby, too. Phoebe cowered on the rock below Versa, pulling Vito closer to her. You've nowhere to go, Snarl said, beckoning to Versa. Come up here, and I'll assure your safety from my associates below. You see, they suspect the reward is for you dead or alive. I'm confident there's more gold if you're alive, but some of them down there don't have a problem with half the gold for you dead. Come up here, and I promise you'll live, and so will the baby. But my friends down there, and trust me, they'll be here soon because Shin's getting weaker by the minute, they won't give you such an offer. Now, Versala Thorn, climb. Do it, Versa. It's all right. Help is coming. Versa cringed in pain and tried to get over the next rock. Don't! Phoebe shouted. It's all right, Versa said calmly. You stay there. It'll be all right somehow. We will get help from above. She looked up and saw Snarl's smug smile. That's right. Keep coming up, Snarl said. I might even give you some of the reward. Lilla, where are you going? Jatesy asked as her sister-in-law grabbed another emergency bag. The rest of the family was now up and wondering if they should help at the back door or try to start breakfast. Lek had just returned with Boscos, who had been helping an older man who was suffering from chest pains. He rummaged frantically around his sleeping children to find his medical bag. I'm going to the back door, Lilla said, as she slung the pack on her shoulder. And no, Jatesy, I don't know why. I just feel the need to do something, anything. I can't just sit here and weep anymore. Lek nodded in agreement. I'll go with you, Aunt Lilla. Boscos might need help doing something, he finished lamely. Selima gave her husband a sad smile. Go ahead, sweetie. I'll stay with the children. Got it, Boscos announced as he held up the bag. Come on. Lek and Bosco started to jog with their Aunt Lilla to the back door. Shem and Pere rushed through the trees to the saddle of the back door route until Shem stopped abruptly. There stood a soldier, his jacket inside out and his back to them, about 30 paces ahead. He was peering over the rock face. Pere nearly crashed into Shem. Shem put his finger to his lips and closed his eyes. A second later, he opened them and looked up. Really? He asked the sky. All right, then. He took off in another run straight for the man. The soldier turned when he heard the footsteps of Shem crunching the old leaves, as well as the footsteps of 36 more Salemites as they ran to the summit. But Pere noticed the glint of metal in the soldier's hand. Shem! He shouted. Knife! But Shem kept running, and the soldier crouched, ready to leap. A few paces before reaching the soldier, Shem dropped into a slide along the dry pine needles, kicking the startled soldier hard in the shins. The soldier fell to the ground, then tumbled over the rock face. No! Pere cried, and ran to the edge of the cliff. He dropped to his knees and looked over to see the soldier's body bouncing limply down the rock. Shem scrambled over to see as well. Several startled faces looked up at them. Rector Shin, Versa whimpered. Guide Zenas, we need help. Versa! Pere cried in surprise as she tried to get over a large rock in her way. Shem leaped to his feet and shouted to the men following them. Get a midwife and doctors! We have injured coming in! Young Pere felt power unlike anything else. Like a rag doll in the hands of a lively child, he moved and twisted and thrust in ways he'd never done before. Another soldier rushed him, and before he knew what was happening, he took 2 quick steps and plunged the sword into the man's chest. He felt himself spinning and catching another soldier off guard, knocking him into the fast current of the river. Turning again, he stabbed into another man's gut, then with that sword still stuck, jabbed another man in the chest with the other sword. Simultaneously, he withdrew both swords and thrust them in different angles, catching 2 more soldiers he didn't even know were there. He had no idea what he was going to do next, because he knew it wasn't him doing anything at all. Nelt and Beavet had stopped chucking rocks and stared open-mouthed at the most astonishing swordsman they'd ever seen. Cephas had reached the edge of the rock face only a second after his uncles, and he saw Versa. Wait, let me help you! He pushed past his uncles and rapidly crawled down the last 15 paces Versa needed to cover, Pere right behind him. Cephas gingerly took the baby from her arm. This looks like a soldier's jacket, he said. It is, she gasped, her cramping increasing. She tried to say something else, but a wave of pain overcame her. "Cephas, give me the baby," Pere said, now positioned on the rocks just above his nephew. Cephas handed up the baby, then grabbed Versa's arm. She was turning as gray as the rock around her. Shem was already sliding down to reach Versa's other side. He caught her other arm just as she went limp and her eyes closed. "Versa!" Shem shouted, shaking her gently. "She had the baby just last night," Phoebe called up to them. "She shouldn't be doing this." "Oh, Versa," Shem muttered sadly, as he and Cephas cautiously hefted themselves and Versa over the rock. Several men reaching over the edge helped by grabbing her shoulders to drag her to the top. Shem was next to her as soon as they laid her down unconscious. He grabbed her face, but had the sickly feeling she wasn't about to wake up anytime soon. "Get her back to camp!" he bellowed to the dozens of men assembled at the summit. "Get her help!" A few men rushed over and two picked her up, one at her shoulders, the other at her legs. "And the baby!" Pere called. Another man retrieved the newborn, and together they carefully jogged to the temple site. "We need help getting the others up here," Pere ordered, but a dozen men were already working their ways down the rock face to give assistance to those struggling. Cephas looked down to the river to see if there were any more refugees in need of help, and his eyes bulged. "Uncle Pere!" he pointed. "Look down by the river!" Shem squinted into the distance. "Pere!" Lek, Lilla, and Boscos were halfway through the forest to the summit of the back door, close enough to see a growing crowd of Salemites looking over the edge, when they met men rushing back carrying an unconscious Versa. "Oh no!" Lilla cried when she saw her, and noticed the third man jogging to them with the baby. "Lek, run and get Salima," she ordered as she took the newborn from the man. "There's a storage tent behind us a few paces," Bosco said urgently. "Bring her there. She shouldn't be jostled so much." "She's safe, young Pere." Cephas reached her and helped pull her up. Young Pere swung and caught another soldier, slashing across his chest but not disabling him. The last four were struggling to pull themselves out of the river. Young Pere felt his strength seeping out of him, and he began to suspect the blood on his undershirt was actually his. "Pugga, it's too much, even with you. My body can't go on." "I know, young Pere. It's almost over." "Pere!" Shem cried. "It's him! It's young Pere!" Pere stared, not daring to believe. "Are you sure? Look how tall he is. Pere, he's come home." Lilla turned to see Salima already running toward them. "I just had a feeling—" Salima's voice trailed off when she realized the situation. "Lay her down," she ordered the men already carrying Versa to the tent. They set Versa down among the piles of extra blankets and stepped out to allow the others to get to work. Bosco started examining Versa for signs of injury, while Salima carefully pressed on her belly. Lilla laid the baby down on a short pile of blankets to remove the dark covering on her, while Lex stood at the tent flap wondering what he could do. The soldier young Pere wounded was now hunched over in pain, but still intent on charging him with his last energy. Young Pere tried to repel his advance, but the soldier's sword caught young Pere across the arm. He dropped that sword as all strength left his arm. "Not yet," he whispered, and swung weakly at his attacker with his other arm, catching his throat. The man went down. "She's lost a lot of blood," Bosco said soberly as he lifted Versa's eyelids. "Boss, it's bad," Salima whispered, feeling around Versa's belly. "This bulge isn't right, and yes, she's bleeding far too heavily. She must have just birthed." A piercing scream from Lilla spun them both around. Lick fell to his knees next to his aunt, who had removed the dark wrapping from the baby. "Lilla, is it the baby?" But Lilla wasn't looking at the startled newborn. She was holding up the uniform jacket, which she immediately turned right side out and held up the label for them to see. Shin. "Like, give me your arm," Lilla demanded. She held the sleeve up to his arm, and it ran several inches past his wrist. It's his, she cried out. It has to be. No one has arms this long. Pere! Luck was already standing up and pulling Lilla to her feet. At the back door, Lilla. Just keep running. You'll get there in 10 seconds. I'll get everyone else. Another soldier, cold and stiff from the river, now staggered toward young Pere. He ducked as the soldier neared him, but the man still slashed him across the belly, then cut into his other arm. Young Pere fell to his knees, barely able to hold the remaining sword. His arms felt like they were on fire. Pere, it's over. There's nothing more we can do, he whispered. Shem and Pere exchanged horrified glances. They looked at the rock face below them, then at each other again, took several steps back and to the side, and ran. Pere! Shem! Cephas cried, as his uncles leaped off the cliff to the wet, snowy grasses on the steep slope. But all they heard as they jumped was Lilla's scream. Knelt threw down his rock. This is stupid! We gotta help young Pere! But he watched in astonishment as 2 men sailed off the cliff. Beavid turned just in time to see them hit the sloping grasses far below, tumble down the hill a ways, then leap to their feet. It's all right, boys. They've got this. In awe, Nelt and Beavid both said, They've got this. The soldier, still weak from the cold water, lunged one more time at young Pere. His sword stabbed feebly into young Pere's side, then fell out as he crumpled in exhaustion next to young Pere. Young Pere gasped a sob as he saw 3 more men coming slowly for him. He fell on his chest onto the wet ground, his strength gone. Pere. Young Pere, look up to the rock face. He tried to focus, but he could barely move his eyes. Everything was losing color. Pere, he whispered. Look up, young Pere, to the side of the rock face. I can't. Something warm and wet leaked down his face. Yes, you can, young Pere. See who's coming to help you. In the blur, he saw 2 figures flying off the summit, the way he always wanted to, but never did. They hit the grasses far below, tumbled and rolled, then righted themselves, and ran straight for him. One of the men shouted, Here! Here! Young Pere trembled as he recognized the voice of Shemzinas. He tried to push himself up, but it was no use. He heard the remaining 3 soldiers jog past him to the familiar figures now rushing to his aid. Shem stooped, picked up one of the dropped swords, and swiftly dispatched one soldier, then another, while the other man came directly to young Pere. He tried to push himself up again, but instead was lifted quickly off the ground. Young Pere, thank the Creator, Pere cried as he wrapped his arms around his son and collapsed into the mud with him. He kissed young Pere's head and held him firmly. We'll get you to safety, son. You've come home. I can't believe it. You're home. Pere wept, kissing him again and again. Young Pere felt as if he were 5 years old, cradled in the safety of his father's arms. He felt like sobbing like a 5-year-old, too. Papa, I'm so sorry, he whispered, as Pere brushed his wet hair and the tears off his face. I'm so sorry. He could barely keep his eyes open, but he could see his father frantically wiping off blood. He was vaguely aware of Shem taking out the last soldier, his body splashing into the river. Then blurry Shem stopped at another groaning soldier on the ground and stabbed him. With his ear up against his father's chest, young Pere felt Pere's words as much as he heard them. Any more, Shem? Not that I can see. How many were there? Don't know, young Pere said feebly. So sorry, Papa, Uncle Shem. It's all right, Pere assured him, rocking him again. No way you could have known you were followed. It's all right. No, Papa. Sorry for... He was fading. There was so much to tell him, but it wasn't going to happen. He knew that now. His father did too. Shh, it's all right. Everything's fine now, Pere said, almost convincingly. Don't talk. Just hang on, young Pere. We'll get you up the mountain. A shadow came over him as Shem knelt on the other side. Oh, young Pere, he said, kissing him on the head. He wrenched off his jacket and wrapped it around young Pere's middle, tying it securely. "Just stay with us. Help will be here soon." There was so much to say, hours worth, but young Pere felt he had just minutes left. Something was wrong around his belly, he could tell. Life was draining out of him like a leaking bucket, even with Uncle Shem's jacket wrapped around him to staunch the flow. Dimly he saw his uncle close his eyes in prayer. So much to say to Shem, too. So much still to do, but young Pere's eyes closed as the sound of the rushing river faded away. Up at the summit, Lilla and Jatesy held each other as Dec and their sons and nephews leapt over the edge and rolled their way to the river down below. Lilla wept as she watched her bloodied son being rocked like a baby in the arms of her husband. The entire Shin, Brighter, and Zena's families, except for Boscos and Selima, who were still tending to Versa and her baby, were either standing on the summit holding their breath or tumbling down the grassy hill to the river. "Young Pere, look, just one more time. The rock face. They're all coming. Everyone, for you." He struggled to open his eyes. At the summit, more shapes leapt from the edge. Somehow he knew who the blurs were. That was all he needed to see. Why they'd be coming to help him, he didn't know. But there they were anyway, hurrying to his aid in spite of everything. It was enough. He couldn't have asked for a better last view. Somewhere at the top of the mountain he was sure his mother was standing. She would see him. At least she'd know he tried to come home. He trembled, despite his father's firm grip on him, as he recognized Uncle Dec, Ralph, Cephas, Zadok, then many more bodies closing in. Then everything grew darker. The pain stopped. There was only blissful peace. "Pugga, Mugga, thank you. Thank you for helping me get this far." The rescatars and the rest of the soldiers, helped by more Salemites than were necessary, slowly made their way to the temple ruin where doctors were rushing to help. The two soldiers near the bottom of the rock face, one of them still clutching a rock, reluctantly turned and started to climb up the face. But at the summit, more people were gathering. Lori and Jory put their arms around their mother as she clutched the uniform to her chest. Down by the river, some of the boys had picked up one of the abandoned net litters and were bringing it over to the huddle of Shem, Pato, and young Pere. Older cousins tested the strength of the discarded poles to use as supports, then laid out the litter. There was a great deal of motion around the men as they made adjustments. Lilla gasped and sobbed when she saw them scoop up young Pere, who was far too limp, and set him gently in the net. "I'm sure he's fine, Mama," Lori said in an uncertain tone. "Just unconscious. That's how he always is when they bring him home." She tightened her grip on her mother as Jory began to weep. Jatesy's daughters clustered around her as the men began to carry young Pere up the hill, with Pato in the lead, holding the front to the support pole. Shem remained by the river bank, kneeling in prayer. "Oh no," Jatesy moaned when she saw him there alone. Some of her daughters began to cry. "He's always praying, Mama," Susie sobbed. "That's just how he always is." Young Pere stood between his grandparents, their arms around each other, watching the procession of men and boys gingerly carrying his body up the slope. "Are you ready, young Pere?" Perrin asked. "It's not going to be easy," Mari warned him. "It may be one of the most difficult things you've ever done." "I know," young Pere whispered, his eyes on his father, who was at the lead of the net litter. "I've done a few difficult and painful things in the past. I know I can do this too. I have to." "I know you can too." Mari kissed him on the cheek. "I'm very proud of how far you've come. Remember, you won't be alone." Young Pere smiled. "Thank you, Mugga. And Pugga. I never would have made it this far without the two of you. At least we got to the mountain." "Yes, you did," Perrin said, embracing him again. And now, young Pere, you can't stay with us anymore. It's not where you belong. I'm afraid it's time for you to go." Young Pere nodded. "I'm ready." At the summit, more and more Salemites gathered, talking in hushed tones, trying to piece together what had happened from the details the refugees were providing. "First, he found Versichaya." "That's too much blood. He looks very still." "He's too far away to see anything." "How much more can that family take in 3 days?" Jatsi wished they would speak more softly, even though they were whispering. Despite the hundreds of people now standing at the summit and filling the forests on the edges, watching the men climb up the rock face while trying to keep young Pere steady, there was silence. Even the smallest grandchildren waited quietly, watching the men climb. Jatsi shoved out of her mind the thought that it was a reverent funeral procession. "Not yet, not yet." Shem finally got off his knees, picked up the last of the swords on the bank, and threw them into the river. Then he jogged up the trail, ignoring the bodies of the dead soldiers, to join the family climbing the rock face. He worked his way up to Pere and seemed to try to take over carrying young Pere, but Pere shook his head and continued climbing, holding the front of the pole. Ralph at the back wouldn't relinquish his hold of the pole either. Frequently, brothers and cousins took turns reaching over to support the middle section, with several additional hands joining in to help lift young Pere over the rockier sections. Several men at the summit pointed to the rock face and quietly called down suggestions for moving young Pere more rapidly. Another person arrived between Jatsi and Lilla. "Is it him? Really?" Bosco said excitedly. When he realized how somber everyone was, his smile faded. "What happened?" he whispered to his sister. "Soldiers. He was fighting them," Hulda whispered. "They stabbed him, boss. Slashed him a few times, too." She began to weep as he put an arm around her. "Papa finished them off." Boscos looked at Lilla, who was trembling and hugging the jacket. "I'll get working on him as soon as he's here, Aunt Lilla." She nodded, not taking her eyes off young Pere. Selima came trotting down to them and stood next to her brother-in-law, hopeful at first until she saw everyone. "Oh, no." Jatsi shook her head at her. It was too soon to know. "The baby's well," Selima tried to say brightly. "Beautiful little girl. Versa's regained consciousness. They've gone to find her mother and sister. They're carrying her to the midwife's tent. She's hemorrhaging, though, but I think it will be under control as long as she doesn't move for a few days." "Good," Lilla managed to whisper. "Aunt Lilla," Selima said softly, "young Pere brought her here. He even helped her birth the baby last night. Caught her in that jacket. Versa wanted you to know he was wonderful to her." Lilla nodded, tears drenching her face. The climbing men and boys were nearly to the top, and those on the summit could see young Pere more clearly now, but he was almost unrecognizable, his face swelling and blood dripping from his torso, despite Shem's jacket, now soaked red, tied around him. It was all Lilla could take. "Young Pere!" she cried, as if hearing her voice would wake him. She started for the rock face, but Boscos held her back. "They'll be up in a minute, Aunt Lilla. Just wait another minute." Pere soon appeared at the top, holding the pole over his head to keep young Pere from bumping on the rock. Lilla rushed over as the men at the summit caught hold of the litter and brought him the rest of the way up. Lilla could hardly wait for them to lay him down on the ground. "Young Pere!" she wailed, kneeling next to him, grabbing his hand. "Please, young Pere, you're home." Pere knelt behind his wife, holding her shoulders as she pleaded with their very still son. Boscos knelt on the other side, feeling young Pere's wrist for his pulse. Everyone at the summit held their breath as he grasped his wrist again and again, searching. Not finding anything, he tried young Pere's throat. After a moment, Bosco's shoulders sagged. "It's faint, but he's still with us." Everyone exhaled in unison as Boscos quickly checked young Pere's unresponsive eyes. "His hand!" Lila cried. "I felt his hand move!" Bosco scrambled to his feet. "Let's get him to the surgery tents. Lila, let go of him." She stood up as her sons and nephews grabbed the pole and took off running with young Pere to the surgery area, Bosco sprinting in the lead. But Pere stayed on his knees, weeping quietly into his bloody hands. Lila kneeled in front of him to wrap her arms around him while sobbing hysterically. But something caught Jates's eye. Everyone was now rushing back to the temple ruin to follow young Pere's progress. But Jatesy stared at something just beyond Pere and Lila. Shem, standing next to them, noticed Jatesy's face began to lighten. He looked around trying to see what she saw. As the crowd flowed away, Jatesy began to grin and weep simultaneously. "You did it!" she cried softly to the air behind her brother and sister-in-law. Shem stared at Jatesy in confusion, but she continued to look just beyond him, her face almost glowing. "I knew you would. You brought him home. Mother, you came here with both of them, just as you said you would." Perrin and Mari, arm in arm, grinned at their daughter before they faded from her view. And that's the end of that part 2 of 4 of Chapter 7, the 36th day of planting. Thank you.